Order, please. Before we begin the daily routine, the subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Dartmouth East. Therefore, be resolved this government continue to fund, allocate, subsidize daycare seats and not transfer these existing spaces into portable ones. The debate will be heard this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the daily routine presenting reading petitions. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good guy.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition signed by 1,411 people from the Guysborough area on behalf of the municipality of the District of Guysborough. And the operative clause is, we, the undersigned, respectfully ask that the Government of Nova Scotia do not adopt the recommendations put forward by the Voluntary Planning Off-Highway Vehicle Task Force in their present form. And I've affixed my signature to that petition.
Petition is tabled. Honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also have another petition here to table. It's from the Shedabuktu ATV Association in the eastern part of Guysborough County, and it's signed by approximately 50 members of that club, and I table that petition as well. Thank you.
Petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. Introduction of the bills. The honourable member, Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 155 of the Revised Statutes 1989 and the Executive Council Act and Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 155 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Executive Council Act, and Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act.
Bill 63, entitled an act to amend Chapter 155 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Executive Council Act, and Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act.
Will this bill be read a second time at a future date? The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to establish a transportation authority for the Capital Region.
The Honourable the Deputy Premier begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to establish a transportation authority for the Capital Region.
Yeah, give these to the other parties. You want? Bill 64, entitled an act to establish a transportation authority for the Capital Region.
Will this bill be read a second time at a future date? The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table an act to provide accountability for the expenditure of taxes on gasoline and diesel oil.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to provide accountability for the expenditure of taxes on gasoline and diesel oil.
Bill 65, entitled an act to provide accountability for the expenditure of taxes on gasoline and diesel oil.
Will this bill be read a second time at a future date? Notice of motion. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reverend Anselm Chasson, born in Shedicamp, Nova Scotia, was a folklorist, writer, and pioneer in Acadian history with a career spanning 60 years as a promoter of Acadian culture and history through his research and books. Whereas throughout his career, Reverend Chasson, the co-founder of the Société Historique Acadienne, was honored by regional, national, and international organizations, including the Order of Canada, the Ordre des Francophones d'Amérique et la Médaille de Chevalier de l'Ordre National de Mérite. And whereas at the age of 93, Reverend Anselm Chasson passed away on Sunday, April 25th. Therefore, be it resolved that this House offer condolences to the Acadian community for the loss of Reverend Anselme Chasson, and recognize his tireless effort to research and promote Acadian history and culture. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Clare community is very proud of its dedicated volunteers, and whereas this year the Clare community has selected one of its outstanding citizens as Volunteer of the Year, and this individual has given in the way of time and energy to various organizations, and whereas this year, through this individual's genuine warmth and caring towards others, she has become a valuable asset to the organization that she is involved in. Therefore, it be resolved that this House extend its best wishes and congratulations to Annette Dugas of Church Point for her outstanding contributions to many charities and organizations throughout the municipality of Clare. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services on the introduction.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have friends of this House and indeed of this province in the gallery today, your gallery. Barb and John Shaw are here joining us from Cape Breton. If they would rise and accept a warm greeting in the House.
Resolution. The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Institute for Health Information confirmed that Nova Scotia healthcare bureaucratic costs are the smallest in Canada, and whereas the Saskatchewan Health Department, for example, has a $2.7 billion budget employing 19 full-time staff in its communications branch, and whereas the New Brunswick Health Department has a $2 billion budget employing 9 full-time staff in its communication branch, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate the Nova Scotia Minister of Health for putting frontline health care first and having among the smallest communications departments for any health department in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
First waiver here, no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Federal Finance Minister Ralph Goodale is visiting Nova Scotia today, April 27, 2004, and whereas Mr. Goodale is very familiar with Cape Breton issues, the history of federal involvement with coal mining and coke production as a former DevCo minister, and whereas Mr. Goodale's recent budget provided an average of $50 million a year for the federal contribution to cleaning up the so-called shared responsibility toxic sites, of which the city tar ponds is just one. Therefore, be it resolved that this House urges the federal government and the Finance Minister Goodale in particular to affirm the federal government's responsibility for 70% of the Sydney tar ponds cleanup costs as outlined in the most recent federal provincial cleanup agreement. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and pass it.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Now a member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Since 1977, the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia has served as an educational centre and museum for Nova Scotians, recognizing the achievements of African Nova Scotians. And whereas on March 20th, 2004, the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia honored Halifax Regional Police officers of African heritage. And whereas the Halifax Regional Police Wall of Recognition was created to acknowledge their contribution to our communities. And Constable Benny Curtin's name has been added to the wall. Therefore, it be resolved the members of this House congratulate Constable Benny Curtin and honor his service to our community. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River, Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas ZCL Competence Incorporated is Canada's leading supplier of fiberglass storage tanks to the petroleum industry, was established in 1987 with a mandate to develop, manufacture, and supply fiberglass underground storage tanks for use in the downstream retail petroleum industry. And whereas the Alberta-based company has numerous subsidiaries across Canada, including Legay Fiberglass at 1334 Quabigot Road in Waverley, and whereas Legay Fiberglass in conjunction with ZCL Composites Incorporated was recently chosen as one of Canada's 50 best managed companies. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs commend Legay Fiberglass of Waverley for their superior work as well as treatment of their employees, and offer our congratulations on the company being selected as one of the 50 best managed in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wednesday, April 28th is known as the National Day of Mourning, the annual day of remembrance for workers killed and injured on the job. And whereas on April 28th we mark the 20th year of commemorating the Day of Remembrance. And whereas at events around the province tomorrow, Nova Scotians will gather to publicly renew the commitments to fight for the living and mourn the dead. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House join with all Nova Scotians tomorrow to mark the 20th National Day of Mourning for those who were injured or lost their lives on the job. I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Gordy Patchett, a grade 8 student at Pine Ridge Middle School in Kingston, has become a fine all-round athlete specializing in wrestling. Whereas Gordy Patchett has demonstrated a strong commitment to his sport and is beginning to realize his potential, and during the 2003-2004 school year, Gordy has clearly achieved success with district and regional gold medals, and therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Gordy Patchett for winning the Provincial Junior Wrestling Championship in the 75-kilogram class. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lockport Regional High School Green Waves senior boys basketball team recently won their 2nd Division 4 Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation Basketball Championship in 3 years at a tournament in Oxford. And whereas the championship, besides being their 2nd in 3 years, was also the 35th Provincial Basketball Championship won by the school. And whereas tradition dating back to 1951 continued for the Kent Palace coach Green Waves, and upon returning to Lockport following their championship win, they were greeted by well-wishers and paraded through town with the assistance of the Lockport Fire Department. Therefore, be it resolved, congratulations are extended to the Lockport Regional High School Green Waves for a tremendous season, with MLAs in this House of Assembly recognizing the accomplishments of the high school basketball program in Lockport. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Coal Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Brad and Beth Pye of Ottawa welcome William Alexander to the world just minutes after midnight on April 27, 2004. Whereas young William weighed in at 11 pounds, 2 ounces. And whereas proud parents and new baby William are all doing well. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the Legislative Assembly congratulate the member from Dartmouth North on being a grandfather once again, and extend best wishes to Brad, Beth, and William Alexander Pye. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
For waivers, it agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Digby's very own Matthew McCarley has been wrestling for the last number of years representing Digby Regional High School, and whereas from April the 2nd to the 4th he represented Nova Scotia in the Canadian Wrestling Championships in Windsor, Ontario, and whereas Matthew McCarley competed along with 690 other wrestlers, making it to the semifinals and came away with a record 4 wins and 2 losses. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Matthew McCarley and wishing him in every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, I'm reading this resolution on behalf of the member from Kings North. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Annapolis Valley singing duo, Donna and Andy, have been gaining a lot of recognition in recent months, and whereas last fall Andy Dunker and Donna Rodenizer garnered a nomination as Children's Artist of the Year from the music industry of Nova Scotia and an East Coast Music Award nomination earlier this year. And whereas the duo compact disc Computer Cat contains 13 original tracks written by Ms. Rodenizer aimed at a young audience but can be appreciated by people of all ages. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate singing duo Donna and Andy on their recognition by the music industry and wish them much success in their musical endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the CAP site, or Community Access Points program, was established to provide free public computer access and training, and whereas the multi-service office of the Captain William Spry Community Centre has for 19 years provided advice, board development and postage to the many non-profit groups active throughout Halifax Atlantic. And whereas the Multi-Service Office and St. Paul's Family Resource Institute CAP site have just launched a website to promote and publicize the non-profit community programs and activities which proliferate in the area, therefore be it resolved that this House commend the Multi-Service Office, St. Paul's, and the children of the Shabukta Boys and Girls Club who will be maintaining the website as it develops. Mr. Speaker, I request passage without waiver of notice and passage without debate.
All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monsieur le Président, par la présente, j'avise que je proposerai à une date ultérieure l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que l'Association des juristes d'expression française de la Nouvelle-Écosse est engagée dans la promotion des services juridiques à la population acadienne et francophone de la Nouvelle-Écosse, attendu que M. Roland Deveau a été récemment élu président de cette association des juristes, attendu que M. Deveau travaille depuis longtemps à la promotion de la collectivité acadienne de sa région et de sa province, qu'il soit résolu que cette Assemblée exprime ses félicitations et ses meilleurs vœux à M. Roland Deveau et aux membres de l'Association des juristes d'expression française de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Monsieur le Président, je propose l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas l'Association des juristes d'expression française de la Nouvelle-Écosse is committed to the promotion of legal services in the French language in this province, and whereas that Roland Deveau has recently been elected of this Provincial French-Speaking Lawyers Association, whereas that Mr. Deveau is dedicated to serving his community and the French-speaking population of Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that this House extend its best wishes and congratulations to Mr. Roland Deveau and the members of l'Association des juristes d'expression française de la Nouvelle-Écosse. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Liverpool Lions Club was chartered on April 13, 1964, and is officially celebrating its 40th anniversary on May 1, 2004, and whereas the Liverpool Lions Club has been involved with numerous important ventures over the past 40 years, including building the Girl Guide Hall, purchasing a boat for Queen's Ground Search and Rescue, and donating tens of thousands of dollars towards projects such as the Queens County Museum, the Queens Memorial Arena, and the Queens General Hospital expansion. And whereas in 1981 the Liverpool Lions Club organized the first privateer days and continued to manage the project for several years until it became too large for the club to host, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Liverpool Lions Club as they celebrate 40 years of participating in important philanthropic work in Queens County. Mr. Speaker, I ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ruth Sterling is the Volunteer of the Year for the town of Pictou, and whereas Ms. Sterling is a lifetime member of the Pictou Garden Club, donating both plants and many cuttings to groups and individuals for many years, and whereas Ms. Sterling has long been a member of both the Monarchist League and Pictou's Princess Rebecca Lodge, as well as volunteering with the Canadian Cancer Society, the Pictou Food Bank, the Save Our Children Fund, and many other charities, and has been for many years very active in the Pictou United Church, serving as a trustee and a choir member. Therefore, it be resolved, this legislature congratulate Ms. Sterling on being named Volunteer of the Year for the town of Pictou and offer its heartfelt thanks for her long service in so many important organizations and wish her all the best. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Resource Recovery Fund's board aim is to promote responsible solid waste management by industry as well as residents throughout numerous stewardship programs and promotions. And whereas on April 27, 2004, the Resource Recovery Fund board will be handing out their annual Mobilis Environmental Awards. And whereas Crosley Carpets Mills Limited of Truro has won the award for business this year. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House congratulate Crosley Carpet Mills Limited and all recipients of these awards. I'd ask for waiver.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas implementing and evaluating quality health care is crucial to good patient care, and whereas healthcare professionals must complete specialized training to become a surveyor with the Canadian Council on Health Services accreditation, and whereas South Shore Health employee Alice Lieberman has completed all the requirements necessary to become a surveyor with the Canadian Council on Health Services accreditation. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Alice Lieberman on successfully completing the requirements to become a surveyor with the Canadian Council on Health Services accreditation and wish her much success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kelly McHugh, a second-year guard forward with the University College of Cape Breton Capers, was named second team All-Canadian. And whereas Kelly was also selected first team All-Star in the Atlantic University Basketball Conference, and whereas Kelly was named most valuable player in the Atlantic University Championships held in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly congratulate Kelly McHugh of the University College of Cape Breton Capers for her dedication and hard work in helping her team capture the first Atlantic University sports title. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas CASA Business Equipment Limited has received a Community Achievement Award for Better Business Bureau of the Maritime Provinces, and whereas this award is presented to companies that are not only in good standing with the Bureau, but are active with the Better Business Bureau and in their community, and whereas CASA Business Equipment has been a strong supporter of numerous organizations, including the Yarmouth Hospital Foundation, the Yarmouth Food Bank, Villa St. Joseph de Lac, and the Yarmouth Association for Community Residential Options. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate CASA Business Equipment on receiving the Community Achievement Award from the Better Business Bureau and recognize their many contributions. Business owners Garth Killam, Roger King, Alan LeBlanc, Craig LeBlanc, and their staff to make our community what it is today. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Wednesday, April 14th, Ridgecliffe Middle School held its first Heritage Fair. And whereas the presentations of the 350 students involved were on the geography, history, and heritage we share as Canadians, whereas this highly successful educational experience was coordinated by teacher Kathy Vio. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly offer its congratulations to the students and staff of Ridgecliffe Middle School on their Heritage Fair. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers that agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberlake Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, April 3rd, the Bay Road Fire Department, Station 59, held its appreciation banquet. Whereas on that evening, retired Deputy Chief Gary Duff and Chief Tim Ackles were recognized for their many years of dedication in our community. Whereas the contributions of Tim Ackles and Gary Duff to our community are exemplary. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate and thank Tim Ackles and Gary Duff for their outstanding commitment to our community and to the Bay Road Fire Department Station number 59. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers that agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders day. The Honourable Minister of Finance on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to point of order. I would like to table today some corrections to the budget address of last week. There was some printing errors, and I'd like to table those today, Mr. Speaker. Also, the corrections are done with the other budget address that is ready for distribution. There is also in the Crown Corporations plan, which was adopted, there is a page that wasn't printed, so I'd like to table those all today for members.
Thank you. Order, please. I don't believe I spoke to the clerk about this. I don't think there's any place in the orders of the day that would that specifically. Yeah. So I suggest the honourable member get up on a point of order. It's just a clarification of facts for the House. Simply okay. Okay. Thank you. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period begin at 12:33 and at 1:33. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, this weekend, Cape Breton made the news in the Toronto Star. I'm tabling an article that outlines the devastating toll that OxyContin has taken on the people of Cape Breton. And I want to quote, Mr. Speaker, from the Chief of Police, Edgar McLeod, who says that in 30 years, no other drug has ever had the kind of impact that this has. Not cocaine, not heroin, not anything. I also want to quote from Father Graham, who says, I can't remember ever having a funeral for an overdose death before OxyContin came to Cape Breton, but in 2 years I have had 5 funerals for men who lived within a quarter mile of here. It's a very small parish and a very large problem. Mr. Speaker, the government response to this problem, a news release issued last Friday that says that soaring OxyContin use in 2003 over the previous year is an indication of better pain management care. Mr. Speaker, I want to know if the Premier really believes that prescribing more OxyContin is going to contribute to better pain management for the grieving friends and family of 22 people who have died as a result of drug use.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the question is a question of substance. There's no question about that. And the government has shown marked concern to the issue that was brought to the attention of government by responsible people in Cape Breton. But we must not lose sight of the fact that strong medication used to treat terminal illness, including OxyContin, very often finds its way into the hands of those that abuse it. We should not make a decision on OxyContin based on the improper use of the drug. We must put in place measures that will allow us to be certain that the drug is being used as it was originally intended. It's a good pain medication, and those that have terminal cancer very often need good pain medication.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier's response underlines exactly what I want to ask from him, because given the horrific use, the horrific increase in the illicit use of this drug. The government's press release is really stunning in its naivete. The department spokesperson says that she can't explain the increase in the use of oxycodone. I can tell her, Mr. Speaker, that there are drug addicts living in Cape Breton who can explain the increase. The release ignores the reports from health officials that the rate of OxyContin prescribed by doctors is 3 times higher per capita in Cape Breton than elsewhere in the province. Mr. Speaker, my question now for the Minister of Health is this. When will your department stop issuing news releases that praise increasing prescriptions of this drug and start dealing seriously with doctors, with health officials, and addicts in Cape Breton to control its use and abuse?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, that the department indeed has been working through the District Health Authority with the local community with respect to addressing this very serious problem that the honourable member brings forward to the House. In terms of our responsibilities within the department, we are in fact working to ensure that we are able to provide more up-to-date information relative to the issue of prescriptions and the use of prescriptions, and we are making real progress in that, and I hope that we'll be able to update our technology in that regard in the very near future. But we continue to work with the local authorities. We continue to make this a high priority of the department, and the department and the responsibility for local affairs is with the DHA, but we're working very closely with them. And the honourable member might also appreciate that the Minister of Justice has in fact made an offer to the police department at CBRM with respect to enhanced policing services.
Leader of Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Speaker, the response to the Minister of Health underlines exactly the problem that we have in understanding the government's dealing with this issue. They download the responsibility and the costs into the DHAs instead of taking responsibility and leadership on what is a chronic problem existing in communities in Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, despite our hopes and despite calls from the community for the establishment of a methadone clinic in Cape Breton, we didn't see that in the government's budget last week. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Health is this. When will you make adequate resources and services available to deal with the epidemic of drug use and addictions in Cape Breton and allow the people who live there to get their lives back?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I can say to the honourable member that we indeed are working very closely with the local DHA and with the community. And we will place a great deal of significance to the recommendations that are forthcoming from the community and through the DHA. And we will respond in an appropriate manner when those recommendations come forward. And as I indicated, the Minister of Justice has in fact made an offer to the Chief of Police in Cape Breton Regional Municipality with respect to enhanced police services, and that is a very important element of this problem that exists there. It is not the appropriate prescribing of the drug that creates the problem. It is the misuse and the street traffic in the use of that drug that is creating the problem, and there is room for enhanced police services with respect to that.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, as we are all well aware, there is a serious prescription drug problem in Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, I have here with me today, and I'll table it, Mr. Speaker, a ministerial briefing note that proves that this government is actually downplaying that very serious situation. Mr. Speaker, a paragraph in the briefing note states, and I quote, "We know that OxyContin is prescribed on average to more patients in Cape Breton than in the rest of Nova Scotia." Now, further information released from the department on Friday shows that the utilization rate in Cape Breton is higher than anywhere else in the province, as is the average number of prescriptions per patient. Mr. Speaker, a highly addictive narcotic is being prescribed to more people on more occasions than anywhere else in the province, and yet the government says we don't have a problem. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister: why has the Minister of Health chosen to publicly downplay the seriousness of the prescription drug problem in Cape Breton?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is appropriate is that all people understand that there is an appropriate use of OxyContin, and there is the inappropriate use of it. And it is to the inappropriate use that the real problem exists. And a major part of that, of course, relates to the issue of illegal activity relative to the use of this substance. Mr. Speaker, we are very much aware of the need to tackle this problem, and that's why we're working with the local community, and that's why the Minister of Justice has made the offer which he has.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay, and your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while the Minister speaks, people are dying in the streets of Cape Breton, literally, as a result of drug overdoses. 39 people since 2001, 9 deaths alone this year. And as recently as this weekend, the police chief indicated the Cape Breton region is on target to record double that number of deaths. 18 deaths, Mr. Minister, from OxyContin abuse this year alone is what they're projecting. Cancer patients on the drug are living in fear that they're targets of a robbery. The government could do some things. They could establish a methadone clinic. They could provide police with the resources they need to address the problem, and they could develop a computerized drug monitoring program. Mr. Speaker, this government gave a cash-strapped DHA $50,000 to get some people together and talk about the problem. My question to the minister is, wouldn't it be better to spend the money fixing this problem instead of just talking about it?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member puts his finger on an aspect of the problem that would be appropriate for the Minister of Justice to address.
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, and I thank the honourable member for the question, because he alluded to in his question the fact that there's this traffic in this drug and is illegal. And Mr. Speaker, there are people who are preying on the addiction of people in Cape Breton. And these people are criminals, Mr. Speaker, and these criminals can only be identified through police activity. And that is why our provincial police service has made an offer to the Cape Breton Regional Police Force to create a drug task force so that we can find these criminals who are providing these drugs to people and to track them down and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
Member Glace Bay, and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, there are addicts in Cape Breton crying out for help. There are people who are dying. The inactions of this government is killing people in my community and communities around Glace Bay and area, Mr. Speaker. That's what's happening in Cape Breton right now.
Order, please. Order, please. That's unparliamentary. I ask the member to retract that.
Mr. Speaker, I'll retract that final comment. But the government insists.
Glace Bay on his final supplementary, please.
The government insists on spending money on actions that are just going to see them through sittings of this House, rather than spending the money on problems that are really affecting the lives of people. The briefing note that I tabled here today says the department wants to computerize the prescription drug monitoring program. So my final question to the Minister of Health: will the minister commit here today to making a computerized prescription drug monitoring system in this province a priority of his?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I indicated in response to the question of the Leader of the Opposition that indeed it was a priority of the department and of the government. My commitment to that priority has not changed in the last 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker. And I can also point out that the offer that was extended by the Minister of Justice is an offer that was extended in January of 2003, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. Order, please. Order, please. Yeah, order. Order, please, or I'll clear the room. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, last fall, the Conservative government and the Liberal Party decided that they would sign away the rights of Nova Scotia drivers forever. In exchange, Nova Scotians were promised a 20% rebate. Over the last number of months, we have been hearing from drivers who still have not seen that rebate. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister responsible for auto insurance is this. What monitoring are you doing to ensure that Nova Scotia drivers receive the rebate that you promised?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, some days in this House you get very lucky. Well, this is my lucky day, I guess.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I guess this is my lucky day, Mr. Speaker, because I got an update this morning, as a matter of fact, on the rebates and the results of our insurance amendments, Mr. Speaker. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? 297,000 Nova Scotians are sharing $50 million in rebates made from November until March.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it gets no less amusing than when they did it last year, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you one who's not. Gary Randall's daughter paid $2,700 last year. That she could have really used the $600 rebate that she was promised, but instead, Mr. Speaker, I'll table the $3 check she got back from her insurer. They've asked, now the superintendent's office has been working on this, they've asked the Facility Association to recalculate the rebate. It's been 2 months and no answer. The superintendent's office advises patience. So my question to the minister is this: when does your government plan to side with drivers and get tough with the insurance company?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member very much for that question, and as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the Premier would like to answer that question.
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, and I will table this. I have a letter here that I received from a Nova Scotian, and I've removed the identification to protect his identity. The letter is in part. I just opened a letter from my insurance company explaining to me how they are complying with the new law regarding insurance premiums. I had been facing an unfair 50% increase in my rates. I had no claims, and my record is spotless. In fact, I received most every discount available from the company, and still they wanted to raise my rates 50%. Well, sir, you put a stop to that hyperinflation foolishness. My rates are still up more than I feel is warranted, but one cannot control inflation. As I read over the letter from my insurance company confirming my rebate, I feel compelled to convey my gratitude for your governance in this matter.
You lead the Official Opposition on your final supplementary. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, the member's office
Order,
can
please.
continue with the charade.
Order, please. Order, please. First of all, the questions, the answers are getting too long. There's a lot of interruptions. If I have to, I'll add time on the question period. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that falls into the category as you can fool some of the people some of the time, but what they know is that you can't fool all the people all the time, Mr. Speaker. The superintendent's office says that there are discussions with these companies and that but there is no plan to take a harder line. And I want to table a copy of a letter that has gone out to 2 other insurance companies telling them that they have to provide a full rebate. The deadline for rebates, Mr. Speaker, was January 31st, almost 3 months ago. So my question to the minister is, when are you going to take responsibility for the actions that you took And when are you going to start handling this situation and ensure those companies pay what you said they were supposed to pay?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said in my initial answer to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, most Nova Scotians are very, very satisfied with what we have done. Mr. Speaker, if there are any insurance companies that are reneging on the 20% rebate, they shall be dealt with, and they shall be dealt with firmly.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we learned that what were once user fees have now become taxes. In the next 3 weeks, we might even find the Premier has not tabled a balanced budget, but we'll leave that to the estimates debate. My first question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is could the Premier explain why he once called user fees are now called taxes?
The Honourable Premier.
I refer that to the Minister of Finance.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the question is very simple. We were putting those in the Financial Measures Act for a matter of clarity and just to take uncertainty away from them.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the Premier. In the case of user fees, the Premier has not been upfront. Again, if fees are really a tax, call them a tax and not a user fee. So again, to the Premier, will the Premier ensure that any new taxes increases will be called tax increases and not user fees?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's what the Financial Measures Act does.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try again. Mr. Speaker, it's important that the Premier be upfront. The message is clear. When taxes go up, call them what they are, taxes and not user fees. So again, my final question to the Premier, will the Premier pledge today to stop increasing fees every time he needs a new source of revenue?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's fair in answer to the member's his question that we remind Nova Scotians that yes, we did raise user fees to the extent of $12 million, but at the same time, we actually provided income tax relief to Nova Scotians in excess of $50 million. That's a good deal for taxpayers, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. 200 out of the 245 bridges in this province are substandard. Many of these bridges are in rural areas providing vital links between our communities. And documents suggest that up to $560 million will be needed over the next 10 years to replace or repair these aging spans. It's a critical issue for rural Nova Scotians. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, what assurances can he offer Nova Scotians that funding for bridge maintenance specifically is there to keep these structures safe?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is misunderstanding actually what was said. We have 200 bridges in Nova Scotia which are so-called steel truss bridges, which range in age of between 80 and perhaps 120 years. And those bridges were built in the days of the horse and buggy, and that's what they were built for. When we say that the bridges are substandard, Mr. Speaker, we're simply saying that those bridges were not built for modern-day traffic.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of those bridges, as you indicated, are 50, 80, even over 100 years old. And I know in the county I come from, in Pictou County, there's one bridge there that motorists can actually see the trusses hanging down at odd angles and as they drive up near it. Hardly instills confidence in the bridge, and yet repeated plans for action have been ignored by the department. Mr. Speaker, many of these structures would be in better shape if they had been properly maintained. So my question to the Minister, why was the 2003-2004 bridge maintenance improvement budget underspent by over $500,000?
The The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, to concentrate on the age of bridges in Nova Scotia, I would suggest that the honourable member take a look at Europe and take a look at London Bridge or a few other bridges that have been around for a lot longer than 100 years. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, the cost of replacing the steel truss bridges is not $550 million. That's for the replacement and repair and upgrading of the 3,400 bridges that we have in this province. In other words, our total inventory.
The member Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Thanks for not answering my question, Mr. Minister. Mr. Speaker, bridge maintenance under the Highways and Bridges program also underspent its budget last year by nearly $300,000. So my question to the minister is pretty simple. How can you keep these bridges safe when you're not spending the money?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, this year we will spend $35 million on the bridges in this province, of which approximately, I believe it's $9.5 million will be spent on steel bridge replacement. The remainder will be spent on upgrading our present inventory, as well as bridge replacements that come about not because of the steel bridge replacement program, but simply due to the general capital program.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Acting Minister of the Office of Economic Development, department that used to be a ministry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the past number of months, the Premier and the Minister of Finance have been bragging about the number of new jobs created in Nova Scotia, but they refuse to tell the whole story when it comes to employment. Mr. Speaker, rural Nova Scotia has been hurting since the election of this government because they have abandoned rural economy. Jobs have been lost. Many jobs have gone from rural Nova Scotia. My question to the Acting Minister, Mr. Speaker, is why has this government abandoned rural Nova Scotia in job creation and job retention?
The Honourable Acting Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to respond to that question by the honourable member because, quite frankly, the opposite is occurring. This government has been working, whether that's with the credit unions for loan programs in this province, community economic development funds, investing where possible to ensure that we have a stable economic future here. And as he knows, in our region, this government has produced more jobs than when they were in government in our time in office, and we continue to work through the challenges we have, and no different than we are working with the federal government right now on the issues affecting the economy of Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
I'm glad he mentioned that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the facts are this, and these are facts that come from the department's own websites and the Department of Finance stats. Since June 2003, the month people received the 155 check, Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate in the Annapolis Valley has gone up to 9.8%, 800 jobs lost. North Shore region, 2,900 jobs lost. Southern Nova Scotia, 3,800 jobs lost. And Cape Breton, 3,900 jobs have been lost, Mr. Speaker. The minister, Mr. Speaker, can say whatever he wants, but this government is responsible for devastating rural Nova Scotia. Will the minister, Mr. Speaker, admit that we have a problem in rural Nova Scotia and do something to correct it?
The Honourable Acting Minister of Economic Development.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I guess we do have a problem in rural Nova Scotia because some of them are being represented by Liberals at this time. Mr. Speaker, the reality is this government is what we're seeing with the rates that member would quote here is the fact that more Nova Scotians are participating in the economy, and what he does not tell this House and all Nova Scotians, there are more Nova Scotians working now than any other time in the history of this province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this hyperbole comes from a minister over there who's now the Minister of a Department of Energy that's been reduced to a $7 million budget a year, and was the former Minister of a Department of Economic Development that once boasted a budget of $90 million in this province, and in this year's budget only has a budget of $38 million to try and attract business to this province. This minister has the nerve to talk about what's happening in this department. Well, I want to tell Nova Scotians what's not happening here in rural Nova Scotia. My final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is simply this. We table a bill in this House today creating a Department of Rural Economic Development and a separate ministry. I want to know from that acting minister what is his government going to do in Nova Scotia to supplement the fears, or to alleviate the fears, and to supplement where it should be supplemented in terms of economic development in rural Nova Scotia. Spend some of your money in rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Acting Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, this government has proven the ability to do more for less. And that was what we were left when that government left office, with a $500 million deficit, left it gutted out of ideas, and a drought indeed there was. But this government has built on the resources that Nova Scotians and communities are providing to us to ensure that we have a strong rural economy and an overall good Nova Scotian economy, something they failed in attempting and accomplishing.
Member Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. You know, Mr. Speaker, 4 weeks from now will be a special anniversary for this government. May 25th is the first anniversary of the Code of Silence Award, which this government won from the Canadian Association of Journalists, Mr. Speaker.
Special anniversary.
The Ham government was given this award in part because they raised application fees under the Freedom of Information Act 5 times higher than they were before to make them the most expensive in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And predictably, now that we've had a year under this new system, the number of applications has dropped 28%. So my question to the Minister of Justice is, will he now admit that it was a mistake to raise these fees and shut the door on information that the public has the right to get?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are very proud in Nova Scotia of the fact that we have one of the most open acts in the country, Mr. Speaker. We have good freedom of information, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the honourable member that we are very committed to that act.
Now, member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, on your first supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, you know, information is not accessible if people can't afford to pay for it. I guess that's how this government wants people to think. Mr. Speaker, the review officer said some other disturbing things in his report that came out last week. Not only were FOI applications down almost 1/3, but requests for reviews have dropped to their lowest level ever. And Mr. Speaker, I think I know why. At our office, on more than one occasion, we've been sent bills in the thousands of dollars for fees for copying information and presenting them back. This is clearly a tactic to deny access to information, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister of Justice is, why does this minister continue to make access to public documents more and more expensive and more inaccessible?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of reasons, things I'd like to refer to. The first is that this government has implemented a routine access to information policy with respect to documents. So, Mr. Speaker, in many cases, documents which were previously released under FOIPOP are now available to the public at no cost, and therefore there are no application fees. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the system is working at its best when there are fewer requests for review, because that means the information is being provided initially, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member would have us believe that if we had threefold the number of requests for review, the system would be working perfectly.
Now, member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, on your final supplementary.
Speaker, only that Minister of Justice could have such Orwellian logic as to why we have such a reduction in the number of reviews in this province. Mr. Speaker, in his report, the review officer also repeated his request to make that position, the review officer under FOI, independent by having it report to the legislature instead of to the Minister of Justice. And yet his government has ignored that request as well, Mr. Speaker. So my last question is, when will this government begin to respect this review officer and every review officer we've had, and Nova Scotians' right to have access to government information?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable member that this government is very, very committed to the independence of the office of the review officer. That's why we agreed and put in legislation that established a 5-year fixed term for the gentleman in question. Also, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that our government intends to come out very shortly with a response to the review committee on the Freedom of Information Act, which will detail this government's response to the bill, or to the proposals. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Constituents of mine came to me recently with a great concern. 4 small tree management firms have had contracts cancelled suddenly by Nova Scotia Power. contracts canceled because Emera, the parent corporation of Nova Scotia Power, has decided to go to a one-source contract. The engine of our rural economic development is a small business enterprise. Mr. David Lee of Atlantic Harbour recently laid off 9 of his 15 employees due to this decision by Emera, and the other 4 firms around the province will follow suit. The group met this morning to develop a strategy for dealing with the sudden downturn in revenue. My question to the minister is he aware of this decision by Emera, and does he understand the impact it will have on rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. No, I'm not aware of the decision by Emera, but if the member would like to bring me the information after question period today, I assure him and all members of this House and all Nova Scotians that this government looks at the rural parts of Nova Scotia, and we want to help a private industry and growth and in rural parts of Nova Scotia. And if there's anything that we can do as a government, we definitely will be there to help those nurseries out.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
In the aftermath of Hurricane Juan, both the consultant hired by Nova Scotia Power to assess the response and Mr. Michael Lester of the Emergency Measures Organization said, too few tree workers, properly equipped chainsaw operators are available in the province. This decision by Emera will not increase but reduce the number of trained and experienced chainsaw operators available in the event of another disaster like Juan. Not to mention the impact job losses will have on rural Nova Scotia. My question is the minister willing to discuss and talk about the negative impact this decision will have on these small businesses and the communities they work in?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I'm willing to discuss this issue. And Mr. Speaker, also to inform this House, the Minister of Economic Development is aware of the situation, and I will be discussing this with that department immediately.
The honourable member of Kings West on your final supplementary.
To get to the point then, considering the impact this decision will have, is the minister willing to meet with Rod McLaren, Trevor Fiat, who the Premier delivered, Dan McDonald, David Lee, and other representatives of this industry to discuss this decision made by Emera and Nova Scotia Power on Thursday when they come to Halifax?
The honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody over here is trying to answer my questions for me, but I'll answer it myself, Mr. Speaker. As every member in this House knows, that this minister is open to meet with any group. And if that group wants to meet with this minister, I will be available on Thursday to meet with any group. Thank you.
The honourable member of Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Human Resources. Mr. Speaker, many Nova Scotians were shocked to learn earlier this year that the Ham government handed out $208,000 in bonuses to senior staff in 2002 and 2003 fiscal year. While government programs were on the chopping block, deputy ministers and senior staff were getting an average of a $10,000 bonus. Almost all of these staff, Mr. Speaker, earn over $100,000 a year. And the government would not provide a breakdown of which staff got what amounts based on a so-called privacy concern. So my question to the minister, can the minister please explain to this House why it is appropriate for senior government staff to be eligible for bonuses while much-needed government programs are underfunded or cut back?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one of the biggest concerns within this department is recruitment and retention. And this is part of the policy that is put forward as far as identifying the names of the individuals receiving these bonuses. Under the confidentiality, we are not able to do that.
The honourable member of Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on your first supplementary.
Well, that minister must be reading a different act than I'm reading, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Last week, the FOIPOP review officer released a decision and a report which said the Department of Community Services should release the breakdown of bonuses given to its staff in that department. So my question to the Minister of Community Services is, will his department comply with the review officer's report and release the breakdown of senior staff bonuses in the Department of Community Services?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I note with interest the information provided by the member opposite, and I will look forward to a recommendation from my FOIPOP people before I make that decision. Thank you.
The honourable member Cole-Harbour Eastern Passage on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to go back to the Minister of Human Resources. It's quite clear, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians will not tolerate top-ups for senior government staff when this government is in such dire financial straits. During this government's first mandate, all the minister's executive assistants became eligible for bonuses. So my question to the Minister of Human Resources is, can she tell this House today whether the government political staff are still eligible for bonuses and commit to tabling a list of which executive assistant and political staff received what bonuses?
The honourable Minister of Human Resources.
In order to provide the best possible services to Nova Scotian, again, it is important that we are able to recruit and retain. Throughout that measure, we will be looking into the question that has been asked, and those available facts will come forward.
Order, please. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Tourism and Culture. Mr. Speaker, for years, the Blue Nose 2 Preservation Trust Society claimed copyright over the name and image of the Blue Nose. For a while, they were making life miserable for some business owners and even the province itself, Mr. Speaker, for using the Blue Nose name or image. One business had to go to federal court to defend itself, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Thankfully, and after the NDP raised questions in this House,
Right.
the province intervened. The settlement was reached in late December. So my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, when will the Minister table to this House a copy of the written terms of settlement between the Trust and the province?
The honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the member mentioned the issue of copyright, and indeed we do not recognize those copyright issues that they say that they have the rights to, Mr. Speaker. In fact, we believe the people of Nova Scotia reserve those rights. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is we have put forward a process. We are moving forward in that process. I have put forward to the Trust for the terms of reference in which we would like the transition team to work upon, as well as the names for the province, Mr. Speaker, and we are waiting to finalize those recommendations.
The honourable member Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, it appears that this whole issue was settled without a written agreement. If there is a written settlement agreement, the Minister has never produced it, Mr. Speaker. Senator Willie Moore, who's the chairman of the Trust, is appearing tomorrow morning before the public accounts to shed light on the Blue Nose 2 role in the Liberal sponsorship scandal, Mr. Speaker. The Trust has played hardball on the copyright issue and has refused the province's repeated request going back several years for the Trust's complete audited financial statements, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister, in the absence of a written agreement and given the Trust's track record, what assurances can Nova Scotians have that the terms of this settlement will be respected?
There you go.
The honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
The member beside me recommends that we elect our own senators, for one. But Mr. Speaker, in all seriousness, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is there's a process in place. Mr. Speaker, there's terms of reference. I have put forward the names on behalf of the province we want to see on that team. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is we will ensure that the rights for the Blue Nose are protected for Nova Scotians, and we will take whatever necessary measures to ensure that that takes place.
Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we've witnessed what the province took when this issue came light later last year, a wait-and-see attitude.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, the unwritten terms of settlement apparently included setting up a new body to oversee the Blue Nose 2. The transition to the new body will be chaired by none other than Senator Willie Moore.
No.
My question to the Minister, will you commit today that the new organization will not get the same sweethearted deal that the Liberals gave the Blue Nose Preservation Trust Society, and that this new body will be fully accountable under the Freedom of Information Act?
There you go.
The honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, I've written on past occasions, as the member well knows, with regards to the financial information, because I believe the people of this province and the people of this House deserve that financial information, Mr. Speaker, number one. Number two, I agree with them. The sweet financial deal signed by the previous Liberal government, Mr. Speaker, was wrong. It was wrong, and Mr. Speaker, we're going to make sure that that problem is fixed in the future.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the minister responsible for what used to be Sydney Steel. Mr. Speaker, this government has done an amazing thing. They borrowed $250 million 4 years ago, and no one noticed. In addition to that, now they are spending part of that $250 million through an unaccountable third party called Ernst & Young. And they hope, Mr. Speaker, that no one is noticing that either. That cash cow that's been going to Ernst & Young, a firm that was sent in there just to do a demolition some 2 or 3, or dissolution of assets some 2 or 3 years ago. Mr. Speaker, you won't find that $250 million in the budget. It's just been quietly spent with zero accountability to the public. Mr. Speaker, in Saturday's Cape Breton Post, it was announced that once again Murray Demolition, and you remember them, Mr. Speaker, that used to be Phillips Environmental, who went bankrupt. But last time they were in Sydney, now they're surfacing under another name. They supposedly won a bidding process to demolish 3 buildings. The spokesman, Mr. Speaker, for Ernst & Young said the bid was about $1 million, with no other bid comparisons in the Cape Breton Post. My question to the minister is, why is he allowing a private bid process that should be handled by government services, procurement, and not Ernst & Young?
Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, why we are allowing it is simply we are getting good value for our dollar.
Member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
That's the kind of answer, Mr. Speaker, I would expect from that minister who denies any responsibility for anything when it comes to spending taxpayers' money. My first supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is this is getting absurd. The truth of the matter is the government is skirting the boundaries of properly public announcements and properly spending of public dollars. This is the government that's demanding accountability by school boards, by hospital boards, but no accountability for the spending at Sydney Steel. Worse, there is no accountability to this legislature. Nowhere will you find any money that Ernst & Young are being spent here, nor will you find out how much they're paying John Traves, who was the president down there running things on the Cisco property. You just can't find it, Mr. Speaker, because it's hidden. My supplementary is, what will the minister do to ensure a fair, open, and government-supervised bidding process for the cleanup of Sydney Steel?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the present methodology that we're using for the cleanup of Sydney Steel is working, it's on time, and it's on budget. And, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that the honourable member should be very, very pleased with the results, since that it is within his area.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd be more pleased if we're using local contractors that are paying taxes in Cape Breton and employing people. That's what I would be more pleased about, instead of bringing in companies from Quebec and Ontario. Mr. Speaker, this minister mentions about what he and his government are doing at Sydney Steel. What they're doing is playing hide and seek the information. We've been trying for months now, to get the information on how much Ernst & Young have been taken out of Sydney Steel and how much the people are making that are coming from west of the Cancel Causeway to steal the jobs from Cape Bretoners, Mr. Speaker, and Cape Breton contractors. Why isn't this government using Cape Breton contractors and Cape Breton labor to clean up Sydney Steel?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of labor that's been employed on the cleanup of the Sydney Steel site has come from the steel workers who were laid off at the time of the closure of Cisco. Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would care to send me a letter requesting the information with regard to Ernst & Young or anybody else that's employed on that staff, Mr. Speaker, I'll be delighted to respond to him. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, this government and Nova Scotia's largest municipality are yet again butting heads over discrepancy in property assessment rolls. The stake this time is $2.5 million. The Minister of Service Nova Scotia has told the Halifax Regional Municipality not to worry, even though it is HRM which has to absorb the impact and hasn't budgeted for it. The problems with inconsistent assessment information are getting all too common. Just a few months ago, there were 2 versions of the Imperial Oil Refinery assessment which were in dispute. My question to the Minister of Service Nova Scotia is, why do there seem to be 2 parallel universes of assessments, one for the Halifax Regional Municipality, the other for the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are no 2 parallel universes. Our staff assessed 660,000 properties in Nova Scotia They do an excellent job, Mr. Speaker, and they will continue to do that.
Member for Halifax Atlantic on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, some of those are pretty large mistakes out of those numbers. So communication between the province and its municipalities is an ongoing problem. I understand that the Minister of Service Nova Scotia does have plans to meet with HRM councillors this afternoon, but there's a lot at stake. The chairwoman of the Halifax Regional School Board is predicting that this particular $2.5 million mistake may lead to major cuts to classrooms and programs. Yep. My question to the Minister is, how do you plan to correct the problems in the obvious problems with the Department's communications on property assessments?
Oh, all right. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, part of my role as the Minister for Municipal Affairs is to regularly meet with and consult with municipalities. Having said that, I've met with every single municipality at least once, many of them twice, and in HRM's case, 3 and 4 times. And what I'll say to this House and to the member opposite and to all Nova Scotians is that in this particular case, it's important that I sit down with the municipality and make sure they understand how the difference between the figure that we have and the figure that they have came to be.
Member for Halifax Atlantic on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I hope this consultation is not what we call top-down. It seems the government would rather fight with the Cape Breton Regional Municipality than engage with the economic crisis playing out in that region. The government would rather fight with HRM over the exact numbers instead of ensuring that everyone is at the very least working from the same set of assessment roles. Minister, why does this government seem to have so much difficulty in cooperating with the municipalities of the province?
Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I believe this government has shown that we have cooperated very well with municipalities. In fact, my track record speaks for itself. I've gone out and met with every single municipal unit in this province, Mr. Speaker. I will continue to do that, and I will continue to grow and foster a relationship that is beneficial to all taxpayers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Human Resources. Would the Minister please explain why she is suppressing the names and the amounts paid to public servants in the amount of $208,000 plus in bonuses, while all other public servants in the province of Nova Scotia are published and they are not?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we do not publish the annual salaries with names, but they can get the information through the public accounts of the total amount.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know where that minister is. She's not even in tune with what's going on in her department. The names of every public servant is published, as is their salary and expenses. Why is the minister suppressing $208,000 paid to public servants, some of which have close ties to the Conservative Party of Nova Scotia? Please answer the question.
Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
I guess the average amount that was included in that was in the vicinity of $10,000 per employee.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Question, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Member Cape Breton West on the final supplementary.
Needs help. This minister needs help. And I would direct my next question to the Premier. Why is he allowing his government to pay generous bonuses to senior public servants and refusing to make public taxpayers' dollars public as to how those monies are spent and who they're spent to?
Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the public of Nova Scotia is well served by our public sector. And we do believe that a pay for performance initiative will, in the longer term, fully benefit the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. They will get full value for their money.
Order, please. The Honourable Member Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Tourism, Heritage and Culture. Mr. Speaker, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia is a first-class venue for local, national, and international artists. This facility fulfills its mandate to bring the visual arts and people together, Mr. Speaker. In addition to allowing enjoyment of the visual arts, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia provides an important education of youth and adults alike in visual arts. My question to the Minister of Tourism, Heritage and Culture is, why is funding for the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia not adequate for it to continue to put Nova Scotia on the visual arts map?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, we invest over $1 million a year, Mr. Speaker, in the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. They play a very important role in the cultural and artistic fabric of our province. And Mr. Speaker, if the member will take a look at the budget estimates, Mr. Speaker, you'll see a dramatic increase in our cultural budget this year, Mr. Speaker.
Now, a member of Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cultural development is critical to creating a vibrant and sustainable communities.
Hear, hear.
Stats Canada studies released by the Department of Tourism and Culture show that culture infusion of $1.2 billion to Nova Scotia's economy in 2001, Mr. Speaker. Yet cultural organizations like the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, along with museums and other groups and operations, get the short end of the funding stick time and time again, Mr. Speaker.
David.
So my question to the Minister is, what consultation has he done with the culture and heritage groups, and what are they saying about their funding needs, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism Culture.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in the previous question, Mr. Speaker, the Cultural Division's budget has increased this year, Mr. Speaker, and the member can see that through the budget estimates. But, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is we're investing in areas for cultural industries, cultural organizations, cultural activities, Mr. Speaker, expanding the opportunities we have in economic opportunities, Mr. Speaker, through our cultural sector. We believe in this sector, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member that whether it's through our music programs, whether it's through our visual arts programs, we will continue to invest very strongly in culture, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, of course, once we get to the Minister's Department, we will definitely be going over the budget estimates for this year. Mr. Speaker, museums, galleries, and other cultural groups are very concerned about the impact budget cuts may have on developing their industry. They need to know that there will be continued support that will enable them to build on Nova Scotia's incredible cultural and heritage sectors, Mr. Speaker. I ask the Minister, what assurances can you offer these groups that the money will be there to support their development and growth?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member that those dollars will be there for investment in our museums, Mr. Speaker, as one such example. Mr. Speaker, whether it's through our community museums assistance program, whether it's through the Nova Scotia Museums program, which offers assistance to 27 museums, 68 community museums, Mr. Speaker, will continue to make a strong investment in the heritage sector. In fact, Mr. Speaker, our commitment goes so strong is to even change the name of the department to the Department of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Victoria-the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. On Sunday on CJLS Radio call-in show, the Minister of Natural Resources finally broke his silence on the explosive issue of revoking camp leases in the Toby-Etic protected area. Some families have maintained trapping and fishing camps in the Toby-Etic for over 100 years, Mr. Speaker. The Minister said he was surprised to learn last week that it was his own department that he would be responsible for forcing people off the land for generations. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, will the Minister order his staff not to enforce this new plan that has been patched together without proper consultation?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's two questions there I picked out of his comments. And one is this minister is never silent. I always speak my mind and what I feel is right for the people that I represent. And number two, Mr. Speaker, the report was submitted by an advisory committee to the Minister of Environment. And it is going out now to public consultation for people to express their views of the draft report, Mr. Speaker. That's where I stand on to the report. Thank you.
Now, a member for the Victoria Lakes on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary goes to enforcement. And as the Honourable Minister mentioned there there was other members around answering his own questions, so I think enforcement is a problem around the area and not only in natural resources. Mr. Speaker, the so-called consultation process on the draft management plan, it's a flawed plan, and there doesn't seem to be any benefit for any stakeholder input. The department doesn't have the human resources to enforce any management plan. So you're going to go out and have consultation. You can't enforce the plan. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, he has admitted that he's unable to enforce the plan after it's finalized. So how does he propose to make sure that the policy is followed?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apparently, the member opposite was not listening to my first reply. I made it very clear that this is a draft plan that is going out for public consultation, Mr. Speaker. I would assume that there will be maybe some changes to the draft plan when it's finalized, when the public input. And I did mention at the radio show on Sunday that there was one user group that was not consulted into this process, Mr. Speaker. And I have sympathy for that group, and I wanted that group to be heard. And, Mr. Speaker, they are going to be heard because there is going to be public meetings in the Tri-County area for these people to address their concerns to the department and to the TAG organization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, enforcement is the issue here, along with consultation. You can go anywhere in the province of Nova Scotia. In 1,000 square kilometres, you might find one enforcement officer. So, Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary to the minister. Since the minister didn't know he was supposed to enforce the flawed plan, how is he now prepared to increase the number of enforcement officers in the area?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, when the final report is into the Department of Environment and the minister has signed off on the final report, we will address the report then. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Timberley Prospect, you have about 8 seconds.
8 seconds. The Minister of Transportation continues to not give clear answers for the twinning project in the 103, and it's a concern
Order,
for the
please.
community that I represent.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for that. Time allotted for questions period has expired. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege that I rise here today to introduce in the West Gallery, Mr. Bernie Jessam from Cape Breton Nova visiting today, and his son James. I'd like the host to give him a warm welcome today. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome our guest to the gallery today, the Honourable Premier on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as members of the Legislative Assembly, we all know how well we are served by our constituency assistants, particularly when the House is sitting and we spend so little time in our constituency. And Mr. Speaker, I would draw to your attention and to the attention of all members the presence in your gallery of some 20 constituency assistants who are down here today receiving some information and as well being made aware of how the House of Assembly operates and does its business. And I would ask members to show their appreciation for their efforts and welcome them to the House of Assembly.
Certainly, thank the Premier for that introduction. I think, order please, all members would agree that they are the true workers of the constituency office, the assistants. We thank them on behalf of all members. Thank you. The honourable member Halifax Needham on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of members to a guest in the West Gallery who is here joining us today watching the proceedings. Her name is Audra Williams, a.k.a. Lefty Lucy, and I'd ask her to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House, please.
Certainly welcome guests to the gallery today. Government business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve into a committee of the whole House on supply.
The honourable member Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to use the time allotted to me today to say a few words about a particular problem within my constituency. But what I'd like to do, Mr. Speaker, with the indulgence somewhat of the House, is to set the scene, if you will, Mr. Speaker, because the problem is concerned is the loss of McDonald High complex, the school complex in the town of Dominion, Mr. Speaker, and the importance that facility played in the cultural and recreational and academic life of people in that community. But I think it would be better put in the context of what the town of Dominion is. Then we'll move on to the real idea of the importance of having a full-fledged school system, a building that would house all the necessary requirements to get a full education for the students and for the community, Mr. Speaker. So let me just first set the scene, if you will, Speaker, around the fact that, you know, Dominion is a really significant little community, and it's basically nestled between New Waterford and Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker. And one of the greatest beaches in all of this province, this great province, which is known as Canada's Ocean Playground, is within the confines of the town of Dominion, and it's called the Dominion Beach. And many people in the local area, Mr. Speaker, just refer to it colloquially as the sandbar. Now, this sandbar has been not only a point of recreation for many people throughout the years, Mr. Speaker, but it's also been a point of industry. Because for years, when we weren't as cognizant of what a beach was to the community, and that the beach itself is a living organism, that we used it to extract sand off of for construction and stone for construction aggregate, sand for cement making, Mr. Speaker. So this was heavily used, plus the far west arm of that sandbar, Mr. Speaker, at one time anchored a bridge that connected the communities of Dominion and Lingan, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this little community, Mr. Speaker, is built around in a lot of ways, as I said, of that beach and what it means for tourism. Its heritage site is, as a matter of fact, is in the old one-room schoolhouse adjacent to the Dominion Beach, Mr. Speaker. So it tells you really the growth of this community and what it means. Now, Mr. Speaker, within the small community of Dominion, they have their own ice arena, Mr. Speaker, which is there due in no small part by the hard work of the community in keeping it there, Mr. Speaker. What we also have is, as we know in most of our communities across this province, is a group of hardworking volunteers who make up many of the social and community-minded clubs, Mr. Speaker. There's an amalgam of Reserve, Dominion, and Gardner kin clubs there, Mr. Speaker. There's a very active Italian community, which I'll speak about in a moment, Mr. Speaker. There's the Shamrock Club. It's obvious that it comes from the many Irish descendants. And a very other strong community-minded body, Mr. Speaker, and that is a group called the Hawks Club. And, you know, for quite some time, people within that community named their baseball clubs and their hockey clubs the Hawks. By and large, if a sport team came out of the town of Dominion, you would know it was the Hawks. And so there's a club over there referred to as the Hawks Club, and these people do marvelous things in the community, and to which I'll be speaking later on this week about the Hawks Club, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, I think that is, I lay this out, Mr. Speaker, about the various groups and some of the history and the influence the Italian settlement had in the Dominion area and how vibrant they were in that community, Mr. Speaker. But all of these groups together make up the community. There's no one group. There's not the Hawks Club. There's not the Volunteer Fire Department. There's not the Shamrock Club. There's not the Italian Club. It's everybody in that community coming together to form the community. But by and large, what really is the hub and the growth center of a small community is its education facilities. It's facilities that are needed day in and day out to do two primary things. And I'll hopefully have time to explain them both. One, and I would argue is the obvious one, is to educate our children and make them productive Nova Scotians. The other aspect of a school is from the community perspective. You know, we were debating a bill in this House the last few days around school facilities and so on, Mr. Speaker. So we know the importance of accessing those types of facilities. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, that the problem with the town of Dominion is not the matter of having to pay so much to get access to the facility, it's that they lost the facility. Now, we have a town without a high school, without a junior high. We have an elementary school that really, while it meets the basic needs of our primary and intermediate age school children, it's very basic in nature, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't have a cafeteria, it doesn't have a lab, it doesn't have a gymnasium. These things that really are and should be reflective of what a school means to a community today. This was a school, Mr. Speaker, McDonald High Complex, the McDonald Complex, if you will, was a school that wasn't shut down because the school board decided that the population didn't exist. It wasn't shut down by the malicious action of someone in the community that could have done something untoward, whether it was vandalism or arson or something like that. No, Mr. Speaker, it was a community that lost its school through subsidence. An issue, Mr. Speaker, that haunts literally all of the coal fields in Cape Breton. But, you know, and we're used to hearing about subsidence and the effects in the residential areas and the devastation that's foisted upon these homeowners when they lose their home with no real access to government help. Now, at one time in this province, in the Pictou County, there was some money given to people that suffer subsidence, but clearly that's not been a widely used method of settling issues around subsidence. So, Mr. Speaker, what we have is literally a school that was devastated by subsidence, where it actually fell almost a foot in some areas, and indeed for safety reasons, Mr. Speaker. For safety reasons, Mr. Speaker, they had to demolish and raise the building, Mr. Speaker. So the building was raised, and now the community and the students are left without a senior high, a middle school, and one would say a P to 6 school that is less than adequate in today's terms, Mr. Speaker. In the idea of how we educate and have a fully rounded child coming out of that system, Mr. Speaker. Now, you know, the people in Dominion could have been really just headstrong and said, look, we had a P to 12 facility and we are going to settle for nothing less. No, you know, Mr. Speaker, the people in that community are good and fair-minded people. They have gone to the board, the district school board, and said, look, you're right. We may not be able to sustain a high school, but what we will do is work on getting a P to 9 school that have the facilities that we can use for our students and give them the education that they deserve, because, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you agree with me that whether you live in Yarmouth or whether you live in Cape North, every Nova Scotian should have the right to the same education system, that they should have the level. Nobody should be any different. It should be any different in HRM than it is in Dominion, Mr. Speaker. And these people deserve none less. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I said to you earlier, that school was lost through subsidence. It was lost through subsidence, and one that was at a time when the federal government held the leases for the coal fields, Mr. Speaker, where they could have came to bat and said, look, we will help subsidize the building of a new school in the town of Dominion. But they were largely silent on that, Mr. Speaker, to the point that I think the residents have given up even pursuing that angle of trying to get funding from the federal government. But you know, I think that they did own those leases, and I believe that they should have owned some responsibility. But you know, here we are today with a community with no real school in it, Mr. Speaker. So what I'm trying to put over to my colleagues across the way is the fact that, you know, when we're looking at new construction, new school construction in industrial Cape Breton, that I think it's incumbent upon this government to find a way to accommodate these people, Mr. Speaker, because they've been so accommodating to us that they've said, look, we will come back. We will not be intransigent in our position, that we know what's out there. We know that on one side of us is Gleis Bay High, a fairly large school. Down the road a little further is Breton Education Centre in the Waterford, another large school, which neither one has full capacity, Mr. Speaker, and they know this. But they're talking about building a new junior high in that area, Mr. Speaker, and so I guess my idea in particular, the Minister of Education, is that I think that has to be looked at seriously, is erecting a school in that town. Because, Mr. Speaker, as I said to you starting out, it's as much a community thing as it is an educational thing. And the reality is, the summer before this school met its demise, it celebrated its 50th year as an educating facility in Dominion. And that school would serve as I mentioned some of those great service clubs before, would serve as an area for them to have fundraisers and dances in, Mr. Speaker. It was truly a gathering spot for the people in that community. It was a community school in all respects. Mr. Speaker, it was not someone going to that school, closing that door, and the gymnasium lights were never on at night. Mr. Speaker, I would drive by that school 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, Mr. Speaker, and the lights were on, and the community was using it. Whether it was for basketball or volleyball or cheerleading practice or community meetings, Mr. Speaker, it was there for the community. It's something that community doesn't have. And I tell you, Mr. Speaker, it's lost not because of lack of participation, lack of want for that school by the local residents, lack of respect for that school, Mr. Speaker. It was a freak of nature. And I think, both levels of government, this provincial one and the federal one, deserve to say to the good people of Dominion, look, something happened to you that you had no idea of, you couldn't take control of, but that's why we're government, that's why we're here. We're going to help you. We're going to build you a school, and you're going to have a community center in there, and it's going to be the focal point for years to come. Mr. Speaker, they deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the Liberal House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to join the debate this afternoon going into supply, and the time allocated to me, I want to spend some time talking about the need for rural economic development in this province, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a topic whose time has come, given the fact that we introduced a bill today in the House calling for the establishment of a Minister of Rural Economic Development. That ministry would concentrate on efforts to develop the economy of rural Nova Scotia. And I notice, Mr. Speaker, that many of the members on the government side represent areas in rural Nova Scotia, and they should be very concerned about what's happening in rural Nova Scotia, or more correctly, they should be very concerned about what is not happening in rural Nova Scotia in regards to economic development. Mr. Speaker, the economies of rural Nova Scotia have been in decline and the number of people leaving our rural towns and communities is far too great. There's a new word, Mr. Speaker, that's a buzzword in Nova Scotia, and it's called depopulation. And that word depopulation means simply that people are moving from the rural areas in Nova Scotia to the larger urban centres. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia at the time of Confederation had a strong and vibrant economy supported by the prosperity of each and every community from one end of the province to the other. Industries like farming in the Annapolis Valley, shipbuilding on the South Shore, fishing in Guysborough and Yarmouth, forestry on the Eastern Shore, mining and steel making in Cape Breton and Amherst, the economy of Amherst as well. Our province was prosperous because our small communities were prosperous, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we in the Liberal Party have a vision to begin rebuilding the strength of rural communities. We envision a day, Mr. Speaker, not too long from now, when the strength of Nova Scotia's economy is measured once again by the strength of all its communities, not just the community and the economy within 1 hour of Halifax. Mr. Speaker, this is a message you've heard before and members of this House have heard before. It's usually followed by a promise or to put together a committee to look into this. Well, Mr. Speaker, we started an action plan today by introducing a bill to the House to create the Ministry of Rural Economic Development. We've asked many questions from one end of Nova Scotia to the other, Mr. Speaker, on what should be done. What will enhance the economy and keep people in their communities in rural Nova Scotia? Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share a plan with you that our party has developed, and perhaps in the not-too-distant future we'll have an opportunity to implement. The first part of that program is putting gas tax back into roads. Mr. Speaker, our party has listened to the concerns of rural business, and we understand the frustrations. The crumbling infrastructure in Nova Scotia, in rural Nova Scotia particularly, is an unfair burden on the people who live there and an unfair burden on Nova Scotians. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that the success of any economy depends on a good transportation system that will serve the needs of the people, particularly in rural Nova Scotia. Far too long have our roads in this province been neglected and are suffering the same fiscal restraint that we see in other departments of government, Mr. Speaker. This current government has totally forgotten both the needs of rural Nova Scotia and the needs to provide a good, adequate transportation system to get people to and from these communities and also to engage in vibrant economic activity in those areas. Mr. Speaker, the first thing we will do upon assuming government in this province, and hopefully that'll be sooner than later, will guarantee that the tax you pay at the pumps will once and all be pumped back into roads, 100% of it, Mr. Speaker, into roads in this province. That's what it was set out to do originally, but somehow that theory got lost when it came to practice because this government is not doing that. Secondly, we're going to create a Department of Rural Economic Development. Currently in this province, Mr. Speaker, we have a Department of No Economic Development. In other words, nobody's minding the store in Nova Scotia when it comes to developing in this province, nobody at all. I mentioned earlier during question period that the Department of Energy in this province is down to a $7 million budget, where the only activity that's going on in the offshore right now is the 2 rigs that are sitting in Halifax Harbour. We could only wish there was one sitting in Sydney Harbour. There's 2 sitting here in Halifax Harbour doing nothing. There's no activity. Department of Energy might as well disband and put the money back into the Department of Economic Development for all the good it's doing in this province. You imagine a Minister of the Crown, Mr. Speaker, his sole responsibility as a Minister of the Crown is the Department of Energy with a $7 million budget. His last responsibility, Mr. Speaker, was the Minister of the Department of Economic Development. When he took over that ministry, the budget was somewhere in the vicinity of $90 million. This year, we see in the estimates, it's down to $38 million. NSBI has come into the picture. What are they doing for rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker? Nothing. What they're doing is cherry picking around the province where they can strategically place jobs, most of them call center jobs, taking into account the payroll tax rebate system that the previous Liberal government put in place to encourage economic development in call centers in this province. What you need to bring the call centers into this province now, Mr. Speaker, is not NSBI with its number of people. I don't know how many people they have right now, Mr. Speaker, but it's considerable. With the considerable high-paid help they have, at least they should do more than have a press conference every few weeks announcing they're going to bring another call center here. Mr. Speaker, what you need to bring call centers in Nova Scotia now is one clerk with a pencil and a paper, because the procedure is there. The call centers are coming to Nova Scotia for one reason: payroll tax rebate. So do you need an empire like NSBI to facilitate that? I say no, Mr. Speaker. What NSBI should be doing, Mr. Speaker, is concentrating on rural Nova Scotia by getting into the communities and finding out what they can do for small business in these communities. Find out what they can do to facilitate entrepreneurs in these communities who need to access public capital to kickstart their businesses. Banks won't give it to them. Department of Economic Development know that. NSBI knows that. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you're a business person in rural Nova Scotia and you have a good idea, Mr. Speaker, banks aren't going to look at you. Banks aren't going to look at you unless you have more equity than you need. And if you have more equity than you need, you don't need to go to the banks. So who's filling that void? Nobody. Nobody. I'll give you a good example, Mr. Speaker, that when I was Minister of Development, Mr. Speaker, there was a business, a very successful business in rural Nova Scotia in Cumberland County. A very successful business who could not get a loan from the bank. Had to come to the government, and the reason the bank used was that we don't know if your buildings are going to give us enough comfort if your business failed in the future that we can recover our money. So this business person from your own county area, Mr. Speaker, had to come to the Department of Economic Development. Got the same loan from us they would get from the bank at the same interest rate and paid the loan back. But this particular concern could not access money from the banks. And I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, NSBI needs to be talking to more rural Nova Scotians in this regard. I think, Mr. Speaker, we also have to make venture capital available to small business in Nova Scotia. We have to keep money in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We have to keep money here in a venture capital process and make that money available to entrepreneurs in rural Nova Scotia, right from Yarmouth to Glace Bay. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, if we do that, if we set the wheels in motion by reaching out to rural Nova Scotia, by going into these communities and saying, you too matter, you matter to us, your small business in rural Nova Scotia, be it in Pictou County, Cumberland County, the Annapolis Valley, wherever, you mean something to us. We want your young people to stay here. We want them to be able to find a job here.